Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we have another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is actually our 30th deck and it's titled The Greatest Seasons Past of All Time. And if you haven't seen this show before, what we're doing is we are randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com, working with a budget of $100 or less, and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So this week, unlike some of our normal decks, we're not actually picking a random card. Instead, we have a card that was suggested to us on Reddit by user Maleficent, and that card is Seasons Past, as the name might have suggested. This is a sorcery for 4 green that says return any number of cards with different converted mana cost from your graveyard to your hand, put Seasons Past on the bottom of its owner's library. So originally, when this deck started taking shape, it kind of felt like a bit of a ramp deck. We wanted some big things in there. And eventually, I kind of came to the decision that I wanted to try to get the biggest Seasons Past we possibly could. So if I did my math right, we should have about 15 different converted mana costs in this deck. We're missing a couple here and there. I don't believe we have a 13 in there because I think the only 13 was Emrakul, which was way out of our price range. So we have most converted mana costs between 0 and about 15. Now, that does leave a little bit of wiggle room in there. There's not too many cards that are, converted mana cost 15 or 14 or 12 even. So there's a couple of cards that don't synergize super well with what we're doing. But honestly, our only real goal with this deck is to play a Seasons Past and try to get as many targets as possible with it. Our biggest possible hit is 15, so we want to cast Seasons Past and get all 15 cards back. Honestly, that's probably not going to happen, but that is the goal. And so, since we're playing with cards that have such a high mana value, we decided that for our commander, we needed to have all 5 colors, and we needed a commander that could help us cast some expensive things. And so with that in mind, we decided to go with Jodah Archmage Eternal, which is 1 blue, red, white, for a legendary creature human wizard, 4/3 flying, and we may pay white, blue, black, red, green, rather than pay the mana cost for spells that you cast. So we could cast a giant 15 mana spell for only 5 mana if each of those 5 mana is a different color. That's going to let us cast some of the top end of our deck, maybe even get it into our graveyard, to then get back with Seasons Past. So Jodah is a phenomenal commander for this deck, and it's probably going to pull his weight in more ways than you would expect. But that's our commander, that's our main goal. So with that, let's take a look at some themes of this deck, some of the other things going on, because we can't just play big costing spells. However, our first theme does help us with our big costing spells, because that is ramp. We have a ton of cards in here that are super expensive, so we need to have the lands to be able to play them. Roiling Regrowth, 2 and a green for an instant, sacrifice a land, search your library for up to 2 basic lands, put them onto the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. I am personally a big fan of this card. I think it's super useful, and it helps us kind of get rid of a land we might not need if we have duplicate colors to get some other colors that we might be missing. So Roiling Regrowth is a phenomenal card in this deck, and it really shows how well we're able to ramp. Our second theme is going to be expensive cards, and that's why we have cards like Thryx the Sudden Storm, which is 3 blue for a legendary creature elemental giant. It's a 4/5 with flash and flying. Spells you cast with converted mana cost 5 or greater cost 1 less and can't be countered. So we could cast our Seasons Past for 5 mana and make sure that it can't be countered if we have Thryx on the board. So he is, in a way, he's like ramp because he makes our spells cost less, but he also helps protect anything that we're casting that might be super expensive. And even if we use Jodah's ability to cast something for 5 mana, it still counts for Thryx because it's checking whatever the converted mana cost was. That wouldn't work if we cast a 3 mana spell, 4/5 with Jodah, but it works the other way around at least. And then finally, our last theme, since we're a 5-color deck and we are running a pretty budget mana base, I decided that the last theme is going to be gates. Guildgates are going to be one of the main staples of our land base because they're cheap, they're going to give us a bunch of colors, and then they allow us to run some other synergies like Guild Summit, which is 2 and a blue for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, you may tap any number of untapped gates you control, draw a card for each gate tapped this way, and then whenever a gate enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. We are running all 11 possible gates, so that means Guild Summit could draw us a total of 11 cards throughout the game, not counting any recursion or having to get any gates back. So overall, it's a phenomenal card for this deck, and we do have some other gate synergies in here as well, but obviously the card draw is going to be pretty important for us. So now that we've talked about some themes, let's talk about some specific key cards that we would like to see with this deck. The first one of those is Bringer of the Black Dawn, which you don't usually get to run because it is technically a 5-color card, but it's 7 black for a 5/5 creature bringer. You may pay white, blue, black, red, green rather than pay Bringer of the Black Dawn's mana cost, so it basically lets us use Jodah's ability when Jodah's not even on the board. It has trample, and at the beginning of your upkeep, you may pay 2 life. If you do, search your library for a card, then shuffle your library and put that card on top of it. So this is a phenomenal card for this deck. We can play it as early as turn 5, maybe even earlier if we have some ramp going on, and then every single turn, we're basically able to Vampiric Tutor something out of our library. We can get the best card we need for the situation, we can find another land if we're missing our land drops, we can get any card we need and draw it every single turn at the low cost of 2 life. So a phenomenal card, definitely worth having a slot in this deck because it can be cast pretty cheap, but it does actually cost 9 mana, so it's a good hit for our seasons past when we happen to draw it. Our next key card is Scion of Draco, a relatively new card from Modern Horizons 2. 12 mana for a 4/4 artifact creature dragon. It has Domain, which means this spell costs 2 less to cast for each basic land type among lands you control. We should have all 5 basic lands, meaning that Scion of Draco can come down for 2 mana if we have all 5 basic lands. It also has flying, and then each creature you control has Vigilance if it's white, Hexproof if it's blue, Lifelink if it's black, First Strike if it's red, and Trample if it's green. This is a phenomenal card for this deck, especially because our commander is 3 of those colors. He's blue, red, and white. So if we have Jodah on board, he gets Vigilance, Hexproof, and gets First Strike. That makes him incredibly difficult to deal with. And Scion of Draco is going to pump up some of our other creatures in the deck. We do have some 5-color creatures in here that would get all of these abilities. So when we start getting a little aggressive with this deck, if we need to, Scion of Draco is the perfect card for that situation. And then finally, our last key card. We talked earlier about gates, and it's kind of hard to talk about key cards with a gate deck and not talk about Maze's End. So Maze's End is a land that enters the battlefield tapped. You can tap it to add 1 colorless to your mana pool, and you can pay 3, tap it, return Maze's End to its owner's hand, search your library for a gate card, put it onto the battlefield, and then shuffle your library. If you control 10 or more gates with different names, you win the game. So this isn't our main game plan, but because we're going to be ramping so much, we're going to kind of have our pick of what lands get put into play. Maze's End can be a good win condition for us if we need it. Obviously, people can see it coming a mile away. It's not like you can usually get 10 lands into play for free without people noticing, but there is a chance we kind of sneak under the radar with this one. So, not the ideal win condition, but it's also very useful in the long run because we do obviously need a way to win the game. So, those are our key cards. And I do want to talk a little bit about some cool interactions in this deck as well. Some cards that I think work very well together. The first pairing of those are Gigantha the Wellspring and Bringer of the Red Dawn. Now, the Bringer of the Red Dawn could be replaced with any of them. We do run all 5 of them in this deck. We just talked about the Bringer of the Black Dawn. This one is the Bringer of the Red Dawn for 7 red. Again, creature, bringer, 5/5, trample. You may pay 5 mana, one of each color, rather than pay Bringer of the Red Dawn's mana cost. Then, at the beginning of your upkeep, you may untap target creature and gain control of it until end of turn. That creature gains haste until end of turn. So we can steal the best thing on the board and make it ours for a turn. And if we pair that with Jegantha the Wellspring, which is 4 and a hybrid Gruul, for a legendary creature Elemental Elk 5/5, it has Companion, but we're not using it as a companion. And it can tap to add 1 mana of every color, but that mana can't be spent to pay generic costs. So Jegantha is the perfect card in a Jodah deck, because we're able to cast Jodah, have Jegantha tap for 5 mana that can cast any card in our deck. And even if we don't have Jodah, that can be used to cast one of the Bringers. So Bringer of the Red Dawn can come down as soon as Jegantha taps for 5 mana. That's the perfect amount of mana that we need to cast any of the Bringers. So a phenomenal combination here. Definitely super useful and super powerful if we're able to get it going. And then our second cool interaction is between Maelstrom Archangel and Sunbird's Invocation. So Maelstrom Archangel, one of the 5 color creatures we were talking about earlier, is white, blue, black, red, green for a 5/5 creature angel with flying. Whenever Maelstrom Archangel deals combat damage to a player, you may cast a spell from your hand without paying its mana cost. And then Sunbird's Invocation, 5 and a red for an enchantment. Whenever you cast a spell from your hand, reveal the top X cards of your library, where X is that spell's mana value, and you may cast a spell with mana value X or less from among cards revealed this way without paying its mana cost. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. So Maelstrom Archangel deals combat damage to a player. Then we can cast a spell from our hand without paying its mana cost. So maybe we cast, say, Bringer of the Red Dawn for 9 mana. We did technically cast that spell from our hand, so that will trigger Sunbird's Invocation. We reveal the top 9 cards of our deck, and then we can cast a spell that costs 9 or less from the cards revealed. So as long as we have these 2 on board, we can get several free spells a turn, which, considering the high mana value of some of the cards in this deck, should just win us the game within a turn or 2. It's very hard for our opponents to come back once we start dropping 14, 15 mana spells each turn for free. And we still have our mana up to maybe counter some things or remove some things. So these 2 combined are very, very powerful. But that is the majority of the deck tech. The only thing we have left to do for the deck itself is take a look at the price, which is coming in at $88.18. Now, this isn't super close to our budget limit, but surprisingly, most of this deck isn't that expensive. The most expensive card in here is actually the Bringer of the Blue Dawn, 7 blue, Bringer, 5/5, same text as the other Bringers. We can pay 5 mana, trample. This one just says at the beginning of your upkeep, you may draw 2 cards. And that card's only $4.91. And that is the most expensive card in the entire deck. So a lot of our price comes from a lot of cards that are $1 to $2, maybe a little bit more. So they just kind of add up over time rather than having one all-star, standout, expensive card. So if you are looking to drop the total deck price, cutting the Bringer of the Blue Dawn could get you there. It would get you down to about $83 or so, but it's still not going to really drop the price of the deck. If you're looking to bring the price down quite a bit, you might want to look at all the Bringers in general. They tend to be between about $2 to $5. Bringer of the Black Dawn, I think right now is the cheapest, just because it was reprinted in mystery boosters. So that tends to be where a lot of the price is. If you're looking to cut down some things, those would probably be the cards I would look at. So the only thing left to do then is to jump into a game. And for that, we're going to have 3 opponents. In this case, we're going to have Sir Conrad the Grim, which is going to be played by Shawn, Zaphi Thunder Conductor, which is played by William, and Feather the Redeemed, which is played by Will. Hopefully that won't get too confusing. But Sir Conrad is a deck that Shawn has been tweaking a little bit for a while. It used to be his Shirai deck, so if you remember seeing the Hellcarver Demon deck that we put up last week, this is a tweaked version of that deck. Zaphi with William, I believe it's mostly the precon with a little bit of upgrades here and there, so I would expect a lot of big spells being cast. And then Will's Feather deck is very streamlined, very powerful. I've lost to this deck quite a few times in the past. It's very difficult to deal with Feather, and our deck is pretty slow, so I think in the long run he is the one that I am most worried about. So we will see how that goes. And just a quick side note, Will's internet does have a little bit of issues during this game, so if his screen goes black a couple times, I do apologize for that. But we did the best we could with what we had. So, with that being said, I will talk to you guys after the game, and I hope you enjoy it. At the start of the game, I get to go first, followed by Shawn, William, and then Will. On my first turn, I play a forest and cast Soul Ring. Shawn plays a swamp, and then cast Eye Collector, which mills each player for 1 when it deals combat damage to a player. William plays a Shivan Reef. Will plays a Snow-Covered Plains. I cast a District Guide, searching my library for a Simic Guildgate, putting it to hand, and then playing it for turn. Shawn plays a Barren Moor, and then attacks Will for 1, milling each player for 1 when it deals damage. William plays an island. Will plays a Snow-Covered Mountain, and then casts Arcane Signet. I cast Rampant Growth, and, to save some time, I also cast Farseek. This lets me search my deck for 2 basic lands, putting them into play tapped. Shawn casts a Milliken, and then attacks me for 1, milling each player for 1. William plays a mountain, and then casts Seething Song, making 5 red mana, and then casts Pyromancer's Goggles, which can copy a spell if it's used to help cast the spell. Will casts a Talisman of Conviction, and then casts Firebrand Archer, which does 1 damage to each opponent whenever he casts an instant or sorcery. I play a swamp, and cast Tempt with Discovery, allowing each player to search their library for a land and put it into play. For each opponent that does, I also get to search for an additional land. Luckily, everyone takes the offer, letting me put 3 Guildgates and a Gateway Plaza into play, gaining 3 life. Shawn gets a swamp, William gets a Temple of the False Gods, and Will gets a Clifftop Retreat. Once that resolves, I cast my commander, Jodah Archmage Eternal, and then I attack Will for 2. Shawn casts a Soul Ring with Milliken, milling himself for 1, and then casts a Sign in Blood to draw 2 and lose 2 life. He then plays a swamp, before casting a Zulaport Cutthroat, which drains each opponent for 1 whenever one of his creatures dies. He follows that up by attacking William for 1, milling each player for 1. William plays a Study Hall, and then casts Zaphi Thunder Conductor, scrying 1 with the Study Hall. On Will's turn, he casts his commander, Feather the Redeemed. I cast a Guild Summit, tapping 4 gates when it comes into play to draw 4 cards. I then play an island, and cast Archetype of Endurance for 5 mana thanks to Jodah, giving all of my creatures hexproof and taking it away from my opponent's creatures. I then attack William for 4 with Jodah. Shawn casts his commander, Sir Conrad the Grim, making it so each opponent takes 1 damage whenever a creature goes into anyone's graveyard from anywhere. He then attacks me for 1 with the Eye Collector, making each opponent mill 1. This has Shawn milling over Egon, God of Death, doing 1 to each opponent with Sir Conrad. William casts a Blasphemous Act, doing 13 damage to each creature. In response, Will pays 2 life to cast Apostle's Blessing, giving Feather protection from red and doing 1 to each opponent. Shawn also responds, activating Conrad, milling everyone for 1, but unfortunately hits no creatures. Then the board wipe resolves, and William, Will, and I all take 12 from Conrad and the Zulaport Cutthroat, while Shawn gains 4 life. William then casts Stormkiln Artist, passes to Will, who casts Annex and Cymede, and attacks Shawn for 3 with Feather. I play a Swamp, and then cast Gigantha the Wellspring, followed up by Migration Path, letting me put 2 basic lands into play tapped. Shawn casts a Bolas's Citadel, allowing him to pay life instead of mana to cast spells from the top of his deck, and he then pays 4 life to cast a Vile Entomber, which lets him put a Stinkweed Imp into the graveyard from his library. After that, he casts a Song of the Damned to make 6 black mana since he has 6 creatures in his graveyard, and he pays 4 life to cast a Solemn Simulacrum. He then searches his library for a swamp and puts it into play. He follows that up by casting Liliana Dreadhorde General, and then pays 4 life to cast Mutilate, giving all creatures -4/-4 since he has 4 swamps, and this lets him draw 2 cards thanks to Liliana. He then pays 2 life to cast Forever Young, putting all of the creatures in his graveyard on top of his library and drawing a card. He then pays 11 total life to cast Zulaport Cutthroat, Eye Collector, Millikin, Stinkweed Imp, and Egon God of Death. He finishes off by casting Stitcher's Supplier from his hand, milling himself for 3. On William's turn, he casts an Epic Experiment for X=5, copied thanks to the goggles. The first one resolves, letting him cast a Ponder to rearrange the top 3 cards of his deck, shuffling and then drawing a card, and he's also able to cast Rousing Refrain to make 7 red mana. Then the second Epic Experiment resolves, but unfortunately he doesn't hit anything he can cast. After that, he casts Rionia, Fire Dancer, plays a mountain, and passes. On Will's turn, he plays a Stormkiln Artist, and at the end of his turn, I cast a Crop Rotation, sacrificing a Plains to put Boros Guildgate into play, drawing a card with Guild Summon. Then on my turn, I play an island and recast Jodah. Shawn pays 3 life for Ayara, First of Loch Thwain, draining each opponent for 1 whenever a black creature enters under his control. Pays 3 life for a Merciless Executioner, forcing each player to sacrifice a creature, which also drains all of Shawn's opponents for 2, thanks to Ayara and the Cutthroat, while Shawn draws a card. He also casts a Worn Power Stone, and at this point Will decides to concede, since he's been stuck on lands and having internet issues. Shawn continues casting Massacre Girl, draining William and I for 1, which winds up killing all of Shawn's own creatures, and drains William and I for 4 more, drawing Shawn 7 cards. He then casts a Dark Ritual, casts Dread Presence, plays a Swamp to trigger Dread Presence, doing 2 damage to me and gaining Shawn 2 life. On William's turn, he delves 7 to cast Treasure Cruise and draw 3 cards. He then casts a Soul Ring, and follows that up with Inferno Project, which comes in with 45 +1/+1 counters, since he has 45 total mana value of instants and sorceries in his graveyard. He then plays Izzet Boilerworks, returning Study Hall to hand, and at the end of his turn, I flash in Thrix the Sudden Storm, making all my spells of mana value 5 or greater uncounterable and cost 1 less. On my turn, I cast Conflux, letting me search my deck for a card of each color. This has me putting Bringer of the Black Dawn, Approach of the Second Sun, Amarith the Lustrous, Bringer of the Red Dawn, and Seasons Past into my hand. I then cast the Seasons Past to return 7 total cards from my graveyard to my hand, including Maze's End, Open the Gates, Rampant Growth, District Guide, Migration Path, Jegantha the Wellspring, and Conflux. Once that resolves, I play Maze's End and cast Open the Gates, putting a Rakdos Guildgate into my hand. On Shawn's turn, he plays a Swamp, triggering Dread Presence, doing 2 to me and gaining 2 life, and then pays 1 life to cast Ghoul Caller's Bell. He then pays 2 life for an Arcane Signet, pays another life to cast Village Rites, sacrificing Massacre Girl and drawing 3, and he then pays 1 life for a Defile, killing my Thrix, and then pays 6 life, going down to 1, to cast Nirkana Revenant, letting his swamps tap for 2 mana each. He then casts a Falkenrath Noble from his hand, draining target opponent for 1 whenever a creature dies, and follows that up with Finale of Eternity for X equals 13 to return all creature cards from his graveyard to play. In response, though, I counter it with Negate in an attempt to save the game. Shawn then activates Liliana's -4, killing the Inferno Project, Dread Presence, and Falkenrath Noble, draining me for 3 and drawing 2 cards. On William's turn, he recasts Zephi, scrying 2, and then casts Erratic Cyclops. On my turn, I cast Approach of the Second Sun, gaining 7 life and putting it 7th from the top back into my library. I then play a Rakdos Guildgate, drawing a card from Guild Summit, before cycling Migration Path to draw another card, and I follow that up by playing what I hope to be blockers in Bringer of the Black Dawn and District Guide, but I choose not to search my deck for a land. On Shawn's turn, he casts Plaguecrafter, forcing each player to sacrifice a creature, killing off the Plaguecrafter, Zephi, and District Guide, drawing Shawn a card, and he then casts Pestilence. He quickly follows that up by casting Grey Merchant of Asphodel, draining William and I for 11 each, gaining 22 life. And finally, he decides to end the game with an Exsanguinate for X equals 8, draining each opponent for 8, and winning Shawn the game. Alright, so that game was a ton of fun. We got super close to winning at the end there. I think if we had been able to untap with our board on that very last turn, we definitely could have won, especially if we had Bringer of the Black Dawn, because we could have just tutored that Approach to the Second Sun right up top, drawn it, cast it, and won. But Seasons Past definitely showed how strong it could be. We got about 7 total cards back the one time we cast it, which obviously not anywhere near the 15 that we're hoping to get, but 7 is still pretty impressive, all things considered. So maybe in the future we'll be able to get even more. But I think the deck did a good job of what it was trying to do. Other than that, though, everyone else's decks did pretty powerful things. Will, unfortunately, got cut on mana and had to drop out early because of some internet connection issues. Shawn's deck was very powerful. The amount of sacrifice triggers he had definitely got there in the long run. I think that he probably could have wrapped things up a turn earlier if he had swung with his creatures, but he admitted himself he was pretty excited just to kind of test out the deck and that it was going off, so I definitely don't mind losing like that. And then even William at the end there had a 45 power creature that was ready to swing at anybody who looked at him funny, so each deck was very, very close to winning, and Shawn just kind of managed to pull it out in the end. But I hope you guys did enjoy the video. If you have any suggestions for future videos or future cards that you would like to see turned into decks, please do let me know. You can make a comment here on this video. You can send them to me over on Twitter, on Reddit. You can send them by email. All of that is in the description to this video. And if you haven't seen the Oathbreaker video that I put up earlier this week, I also highly recommend checking that out. There is an Oathbreaker stream coming up just tomorrow that I will be a part of. All that information can be found in our Nico Eris deck tech from Tuesday. So I highly recommend you check that out. It's a charity stream. There's going to be some great people there. So if you get the chance. And then also, let me know what you thought of the Oathbreaker video, of this Commander video. If you want to see any other types of videos, I'm more than happy to do standard or modern or whatever else is out there. So if you have suggestions, please do let me know. But like I said, I hope you guys enjoyed the game. Hope you enjoyed the deck tech. And I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.